Hello and welcome to On Point. My name is Brittany Silverstein. Today we are going to talk about the best way to finance your college education and how it may be more affordable than you think. Joining me today are two California State University Northridge money experts. First, we have Gregorio Alcantar, a counselor from the Financial Aid Department, and we also have G. Michael Phillips, director of the Center for Financial Planning and Investment. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, just so we're all on the same page, what exactly does the term financial literacy really mean? Let's start with you.
Financial literacy means having an understanding, being literate of matters related to money. And so it can be understanding what budgeting is from the definition to actually knowing what to do with a budget, understanding costs, and just basically understanding what money and how it plays, especially in this case for college education.
Would you like to add to that?
Sure. I view financial literacy as really dealing with all the nuances of lifestyle management. You have to make decisions about how you spend the resources you've got available to you, and the resources are actually not just your dollars and cents, but also your time, your energy. You've got your credit. You have the ability to invest now in order to be able to get more down the road. You can spend more now and not invest so much either in your education or your training or in your financial investments. But the financial literacy really comes into play looking at the impact of all of those decisions on what you have now and what you're going to be able to have in the future and what opportunities that's going to open up because of the decisions you made.
Now, a 2008 survey from the Jumpstart Coalition on Basic Financial Literacy found that college freshmen received a 59%, and then that number slightly increased as with each college year. I know, Mike, that you teach finance courses. Do you think that students have a good concept of money going into them?
It's my experience that Cal State Northridge students, like most students in America, have a dismal understanding of what the different financial products are, and unfortunately wind up being targeted by many marketers, and as a result make poor decisions because they're not aware of the implications of many of the decisions that they're making. And so they wind up so often making a wrong step that's going to be having long-term consequences that could derail an entire career on down the road.
Why do you think that they don't have such a good understanding to begin with? Is it just because financial issues are just something that's not taught?
Well, that's a hard question. I think that finances have become complicated. I think that students are being exposed to many of the financial decisions at an ever younger age. We have many students at Cal State Northridge who were not raised in the United States. And as a result, the financial system here may be very different than that where they were raised. We also have many people who come from lower socioeconomic strata who may not have been exposed to some of those decisions when they were being raised. And so we have many people who mean well but may not have been exposed to the opportunity to learn about making some of these financial decisions. They may not have been in a school that had enough resources to be able to teach about financial literacy. They may not have been able to be mentored by people in a church youth program or scouts or anywhere that they might have learned about some of these broader lifestyle kinds of issues. And then they reach the freedom at the college campus, often with a lot of spending money and no real obligations, and people who target in on them with a great big bullseye on the front of their shirt there, figuring that that's money in their pocket, I want it in my pocket. And some of these marketers are very, very savvy, and the students, unfortunately, so often don't make the right decisions.
Right. So do you find that more students are now paying attention to financial literacy? I know, Gregorio, that you were mentioning to me that the Financial Aid Department has been hosting a series of financial aid workshops and money workshops. And have you seen the numbers go up in recent years of students who attend?
Yeah, they are actually going up. Every year we have noticed. In 2005, our department actually started trying to put together financial literacy workshops. At the time, we used to call it dollars and cents, anything to just kind of get the students interested. But what we did find was that since the recent, economic downturn and just because it's in the backdrop, then students have maybe taken more interest because now they have to do more with less. And so not only does it in terms of financial aid, but also just the money that they're acquiring. So these literacy workshops hone in on those type of concerns, such as how to eat on a budget, healthy, how to budget the money that you have and things like that.
Now, I know that the subject of tuition has been a real hotspot for the past couple of years with the economy and the economic downturn, especially in California, and it's caused a lot of student protests and overall just outrage. Do you personally think that a college degree is still worth the cost?
I totally agree with that it is still important because a college degree opens many options, many doors, gives you the flexibility to make wiser decisions and know exactly what's going on in your surrounding. So it continues to be very important. I totally agree.
And do you have anything to add?
Well, I think that a college degree is essential, more so now than it's ever been, if for no other reason than as a certification. If you get a college degree, it almost doesn't matter what the major is. You show that you have been able to be capable, you've been able to turn in homework, you've been able to show up on a regular schedule, and you've been able to accomplish something. And that makes you different than the people who weren't able to get that college degree. So often, a college degree is now being used as just a first pass, even for jobs which didn't traditionally require a college degree. I think that it certainly makes sense. And if you take a look at the statistics, people with college degrees wind up making substantially more money, regardless of the major, than people without college degrees. And then, of course, there's some majors which wind up being far more highly compensated even than just a typical college degree.
Now, how would you say, Gregorio, that the recession has impacted financial aid programs?
Well, it depends how you look at it. In terms of just federal student aid, the impact has not really been as great, and this is in my opinion from what I see being a counselor and working with these programs. However, what I do see is that the costs, related to education are going up, but if the money is still the same or relatively just slightly going up, the true cost is still just outweighs the money that comes in. So it may appear that there is less coming in, but it always really has been the same. It's just that now, put it against the increasing costs, is trying to teach students that, how would you do with less?
Now, recent statistics from 2007 to 2008 show that roughly half of Cal State students receive financial aid, and I know at CSUN the numbers are around 70%. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that these numbers are higher now that they're because of the recession?
Actually, no, they've been consistent.
Oh.
Since I started working in 2005, we at CSUN have roughly 60% of our student body. That translates to a little over 22,000 students receiving a type of financial aid consistent every year.
Okay, and would you like to add anything to that?
I have no evidence on that. I know that I seem to have about the same number of students I've always had, although I have had more students who have been in deep financial problems, making bad decisions, typically with credit cards, in the last couple of years than I had for several years before that.
So, the term financial aid, it's a big topic. It applies to many different programs, including loans, grants, scholarships. Let's break them down. Now, first, let's start with loans. What are the top loan options for students?
Well, in the federal student loan program, there are, three. There is the Stafford Loan Program. There is the Perkins Loans Program. And then for parents that can borrow on behalf of the student is known as the Parent Plus Loan Program. And basically those three are federal programs that have low interest. When you compare it, of course, to, let's say, a credit card, they have lower interest, a lot of options in terms of postponing payment, and then generous repayment options when it comes to having to repay.
Did you want to add?
I was just going to say that there's also a number of scholarships on campus that people seem not to be aware of. I have been on our college scholarship committee off and on, and there are years that we have thousands of dollars to give away and no one has applied for it.
I think, it seems a lot of students believe that in order to receive a scholarship, they have to have the best grades. Do you think is that the case, or is there a scholarship for a wide variety of things?
I think that there's a wide range of scholarships that are out there, and you need to look and see what the characteristics are of the one you're applying for. If there's one which is going to a high GPA, then a low GPA would not help. But often they're looking for people who have an interest in developing a career in an area, who perhaps have overcome adversity in order to be able to achieve whatever they're achieving. It's not just a black and white grade point. It's really, most of the scholarship committees I've been a part of have been looking far more at a holistic view of who the student is.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the loans, is it better to apply for a federal loan, or is it better to apply for one at a bank, or is it just, based on the individual?
If you're faced with only those two options, a federal student loan is always the better option because it's low interest. You can postpone repayment for a while, especially while you're a student. And then the repayment plans, you can change them. Let's say you can't afford the standard repayment plan, which is usually 10 years. You can change it to interest only, and then you can pay principal. So basically, once you graduate or once you're out of school, the terms for repayment are more generous and more helpful.
Now, are there bad ones out there that students should avoid?
You mean in terms of
Loans.
Loans? Well, I think that
Or
anything
scams.
outside. Well, I'm sure there are out there. I know that anything outside of, when I talk to students, I say any loans you consider outside of the federal student aid loan programs, they may not be as beneficial in the sense that you may not get the fixed rates, you may not have generous terms, they may not be as lenient. One of the advantages you have for applying for federal student aid student loans is you can have the worst credit and they'll still give you a student loan. Whereas with other places outside of that, sometimes they do credit checks and things like that, so you may not get the benefits.
Now, going back to that issue of a student having bad credit, or even if their parents have bad credit, what, Mike, do you think would be the best way for them to get a loan?
Well, if they have that poor credit, then they would want to go through the federal student loan program. That would be appropriate. Backing up one, in terms of bad loans, I have seen many students who have used their credit cards, and many times they wind up, by the time they graduate, with $60,000 or $70,000 in credit card debt, which is astounding to me. And that's a bad way to do it. Students should not be using credit cards to pay for their college education, particularly when there are so many other very legitimate loan resources available. I have been told that there are years that there's unclaimed loan money that people just are not applying, perhaps because they don't know it's available.
And I would like to just give an example of maybe why that's happening too, that students are maybe taking out more credit card as opposed to. In talking to students, I find that it's because they don't understand student loans. Somehow they've been taught or learned more about credit cards, so it's easier, more comfortable to say yes to that as opposed to a student loan. Even after you paint it very nicely that the student loan is more beneficial than a credit card, for some reason, they're like, but I don't understand that. That's why I always go this direction. I understand that after 30 days of making a charge, I will just have to pay it back, and I know that it's always available and things like that, but it's just the fear of not understanding.
So do you think that students on the whole should avoid credit cards, or is there some positive, if it's used correctly, that is there a positive?
Well, I know
reason to use them?
there is positive in terms of building credit, and but being responsible is the key, but also understanding what you're using it for. If you're a student and there is a program known as Federal Student Aid that can help fund your education, why not take advantage of it? Leave credit cards for other things. I know Mike can add some more information on that, but...
Well, what I was going to say is I think that credit cards are excellent, and I think that it's good for students to have credit cards. But I also think it's a game. The credit card company wants you to build up a large amount of charges so they can put your money in their pocket by charging you interest. And you want to use the card to pay for your transactions and pay them off each month. I think that if you have the discipline to use a credit card to document your charges so that you don't have to carry a large amount of cash around with you, I think credit cards are excellent, but it's important to be disciplined. It's important to make sure that you do pay them off each month in a timely fashion. That will help to show that you have a good credit rating. It will help to develop your credit rating, but it will also give you that transaction without building up all the interest that gets you into trouble.
Now, students choose to finance their college education in different ways. Some take out loans, some work part-time or full-time, and some do a combination of both. Is there one way that's more successful than the others, or does it just depend on the individual? What would you say, Mike?
That is a really interesting trade-off. And while there are some people who, for family reasons, must work and extend their college time, the difference between what you make working part-time as a college student and what you make when you go full-time into your career is major. And in most cases, when I've done the actual calculations, it is far better for students, if they can, to take the loans and go full-time and get their college degree done in 4 years and then go out and make a substantially greater amount of money with their college degree. If they're making minimum wage or $10 an hour, that's what, $20,000 a year, in contrast to going out and starting to work at 35 to, some of our students are getting jobs at $65,000 and $70,000 a year. And getting a job at 70 grand is a whole lot better than another year working at minimum wage. And just think, every year that you postpone going into the labor force, you're not only taking on those loans, you're not only living smaller, you're not taking on the loans, but you're foregoing that year's worth of earnings. So you might not want to take the loan because you have to pay back an extra $15,000, but what you're doing is you're giving up $30,000 or $40,000 in order to do that, and that trade-off doesn't make sense. Sometimes it does make sense for people to keep doing what they're doing and to postpone without taking the loans, but I think in most cases it's really advantageous to try and get the college degree done as expeditiously as you can.
Now let's move on to a different way of financing. You know, a lot of grants are available. What different options do students have for grants?
Well, in terms of grants, specifically when you apply for federal student aid, and of course the way you apply for federal student aid is you submit one application known as the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Then you get evaluated based on 100 questions that you answer. But if you demonstrate exceptional need assistance, then one of the things you can receive is grants. And grants is free money that's granted to you without the expectation of you ever having to return. And I can tell you at least two. There is the Pell Grant, which is a federal program, very generous amount that they provide you with, and also the California grant known as the Cal Grants. So I think those two just alone can help pay for your education.
Now I know by personal experience that the FAFSA is a very long and complicated process. Is it better for students to apply the earlier the better, or does it not make it such a difference?
No, well, it actually helps you. The period for applying to be considered on time begins in January 1st, all the way to March 2nd here in California. And it helps because then not only do you submit your FAFSA on time, you can be in a position to receive the most funding available. I know that the Cal Grant program is very stringent on the deadline, that should you miss that deadline and you were eligible for that program, you may not be actually able to get into it. But also it helps the offices that are processing your paperwork to give them an ample time to guarantee the award be available by the first day of class.
Now, I know that most students think in the short term with their money. They think up until graduation and getting that degree. But why is it so important for students to start thinking about saving now? Michael.
Well, one is that if they're working at all and can start to fund a retirement plan through, for example, a Roth IRA, that will pay huge benefits on down the road. A Roth IRA is something that most of our students would be eligible to participate in. That's where they can take some money after they've paid their taxes on it. They can take that money and put it into a special retirement account, and then they can invest that money and it will grow over time, and then when they get to the point of retirement, they can take that money out without having to pay taxes on it. Presumably, right now, they're in a low income tax rate. Sometimes they may not even have much in the way of income tax they'd have to pay. So it's essentially a way to invest almost tax-free, and then when they get the monies out later, that'd be beneficial. The power of compound interest is remarkable. The more years you have to invest, the more money you're going to have down the road. There's something I teach my students called the rule of 72. Which is, Professor, I have to give you a little bit of a mathematical equation here. You take 72 and divide it by the interest rate you get, and that's about how long it takes for your investment to double. So if you have 6% interest, 72 divided by 6, your money would double in about 12 years. So if you were to start at now and then 24 years from now, it would have doubled twice. And then 36 years and you retire, it would have doubled another time. If you postpone until you're in your early 30s, you'll miss out on one of those doublings. If you can get started in college, you might be able to slip in another one. You could have a factor of 4, a factor of 8, greater retirement with the same amount of money initially deposited. So if you can start saving early, it's good to get into the habit. It's good to start to create that savings medium for your needs on down the road. And as you've got a lot more years to invest, you're going to wind up being in far better position when it comes time to use that money later on for the lifestyle that you want for the other half of your life.
Now, what are some easy ways that students can save? I know, Gregorio, you recently compiled this list explaining some easy ways.
Well, there are money saving strategies, but another way you can look at it is ways to get into the habit or create a behavior of maximizing the money. It's great what Mike is saying, that investing is very important, but if students don't really understand how to just hold on to the money they have now, then they may have trouble there. So for example, when we talk to students, one of the things we say is one way to save is to spend only on things you need, not the things you want. And it's very, very hard, easily said than done, but we start by letting them know that one of the things is understanding the difference between a fixed expense and a flexible expense. What are those fixed expenses? Are those things you need money for now, such as registration fees because you are going to college, rent if you're going to be living in an apartment. So you need to make sure, books for the classes, things like that. So you need to have money for that. So what do you do then in order to have is to reduce your expenditure on the flexible expenses, which may be food, clothes, entertainment, transportation. Because if most of the money is going on the flexible side, I would like to throw credit cards in there too. If you start putting a lot of money on the flexible side, then of course you're going to have a hard time having money for what's important.
Do you have any financial tips to add to that?
Some of my students in the Finance 302 General Education course write about how they spend their money. One of the things I have the students do is to keep a log for a few weeks of where their money goes. And they're usually surprised at how much just trickles out of their pockets on video games, an extra Starbucks, things that are impulse convenient purchases. One of the suggestions that I have if you're trying to watch your funds is not carry so much with you. If you're out and you see something, go home and get the money and then go back and buy it. And so often, if you have the hassle of having to go all the way home and get your money and then come back to get it, it's not worth it after all. Some of my students wind up spending way too much on the next big thing, whatever that happens to be, the newest model car, the latest designer, this, that, or the other. Whereas if they could wait and pretend they had it in their closet for a year and buy it new at the rack or the used store, you can save a tremendous amount of money and have something that's almost as good.
Now, let's talk about landing that first job after graduation. What, Michael, do you think are the first steps that people should take to get on the right financial track?
Well, I think the first thing that people need to do is to think a lot about what kind of lifestyle they have in mind. I would like to see students do this when they're freshmen and sophomores, when they're trying to think about what kind of major and what kind of career path they want to be going and following. They need to take a look at what a typical lifestyle, what a typical earning stream is for someone working in that profession, and make sure that that's consistent with what they want. If you have a very material life, you may not want to be a poetry major. You know, not that poetry is a bad major, but it's not as well compensated as some of the other degrees that one could pick. If what you want is a lot of free time and flexibility to travel, there are certain kinds of engineering degrees you might not want to pursue because those can be very intense, highly compensated, but very demanding in terms of how much time you spend on the job. So I think early on, you need to look and make sure that you understand the lifestyle and get that consistent. Then when you're out looking for the job, you need to look broadly and there's all kinds of ideas on finding the job. I don't know if you want to go there or not. But.
Well, what I definitely want to know is, once students get that job, when do they even have to start thinking about paying back those college loans? Do you want to answer that?
Well, that's your area.
Yeah. Well, basically, once you graduate or you leave college, you have, if you borrow federal student loans, 6 months after you have separated from the university, you begin to make your first payment. And basically what it is that the lender starts contacting you within those 6 months to just let you know you want to get ready and to give you that time to, settle in and into your first job. But basically 6 months after that, you begin your payments. And as I mentioned before, if the initial repayment plan that they set you up is not really working for you, you can change it for other kinds that exist, such as consolidation or interest only, in a way to make it comfortable, especially because you're just starting off and you have to get used to that payment.
You have anything to add to that?
Not on repaying the loans. I think that it's something, though, that you need to be sure to budget into.
So why is it so important for students in both high school or even college to take a finance course?
Anymore, handling financial decisions is vital to survival. We've seen what happens when people make bad decisions. We've seen how easy it is for people to be taken advantage of. We see what happens as people live longer without resources. It's important that we all learn the rules of the game.
So any final words of advice? Let's start with you, Gregorio.
Well, I would like to advise students and anyone seeing the show that if you're interested in paying for your college education, please apply for federal student aid. Submit the FAFSA. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. And after just a couple evaluations here and there, we will determine and we will help you with grants, scholarships, work study. And those three are just free money to begin with. And then, of course, we round off your package with any student loans. And that will help greatly in pay for your education.
And do you have any advice?
I would say learn as much as you can. For example, we have the Finance 302 class, which is something we encourage every student in the university to take. And then when you get into a relationship, if you do, please talk with the people that are near and dear to you about money issues. We see so many families wind up having major problems down the road because the people don't talk about different lifestyle issues, about differences in savings versus spending. Don't be afraid to talk about the financial decisions and work together to optimize your lifestyle.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time for today, but thank you both so much for coming. I'm Brittany Silverstein, and you're watching On Point.
High school is a good place to get started. College, when people are trying to integrate that with their major, is a better way to continue. And I would like to see financial literacy and financial education be a lifelong activity.